Long ago, in a castle not quite grand enough to be remembered, and not quite small enough to be ignored, a curious thing happened every night. The servants came alive, not in the dancing broomsticks sort of way. No, this was more subtle. As the nobles snored in feathered beds, and the rats rehearsed their tap routines in the pantry, the servants tiptoed into their secret second lives. They weren't just polishing goblets and fluffing pillows. Oh no, they were gossiping in Latin, hosting underground sock-mending tournaments, and debating whether Lord Percival's beard was a sentient being. This is the story of those quiet rebellions, those candle-lit conspiracies, and the noble art of not waking the Duke while reenacting a dramatic cabbage theft. So tuck in, dear dreamer. The chamber pots are whispering again, and before your eyelids betray you, don't forget to gently tap that like button with your pinky, subscribe with a yawn, and let me know in the comments from which medieval village or modern couch you're watching from, preferably in your sleepiest accent, in the castle of Grumblethorpe, a name chosen not for grandeur, but for the sound the Duke made when rising from his bath. The nights were quieter than a mouse tiptoeing through a cheese shop. The nobles slept soundly, dreaming of jousts, taxes, and which cousin they'd marry next. But below the velvet and stone, in the crooked servants' quarters, the real story began. The chamber pots whispered. Not literally, of course. That would be absurd. They were far too busy being full. But the phrase had become a sort of code among the servants, a signal that the night had begun, and with it, their secret lives. At precisely 1 hour past the last noble snore, the castle transformed. The scullery maid, Agnes, swapped her apron for a velvet cloak she'd stitched from discarded curtains. She claimed it gave her mystical powers of sass. The stable boy, Ned, donned a monocle made from a broken lantern and insisted he was now Lord Haystack, keeper of the straw. No one questioned it. In the laundry room, a group of footmen gathered around a flickering candle, playing a game called Guess That Stain. It was part entertainment, part forensic science. Mutton gravy, said one. No, said another, sniffing dramatically. That's betrayal and gooseberry tart. Meanwhile, in the pantry, the cook's assistant, Mabel, held clandestine poetry readings to the rats. Her latest work, Ode to a Slightly Burnt Turnip, received squeaks of approval and one tiny standing ovation. But the true heart of the night was the grand hall, or rather, the broom closet beside it. There the servants held their nightly council, seated on overturned buckets and one suspiciously fancy chamber pot. They discussed matters of great importance. Who had the best gossip, which noble had the worst breath, and whether the castle ghost was just the butler in a sheet. Tonight's agenda was particularly thrilling. Rumor had it that Lady Mildred's nightgown had gone missing. Again, the servants suspected foul play, or at least foul laundry. Perhaps it's the ghost, whispered Agnes, dramatically flipping her curtain cloak. Or perhaps, said Ned, adjusting his monocle, Lady Mildred is secretly a bat. There was silence. Then someone coughed. Then someone else sneezed. Then someone farted, which was blamed on the ghost. And so the night wore on, filled with laughter, candlelight, and the quiet joy of rebellion. The servants of Grumblethorpe knew their place by day, but by night they were poets, detectives, philosophers, and champions of sock mending. And as the first rays of dawn crept over the castle walls, they returned to their beds, their secrets tucked beneath their pillows, and their chamber pots, whispering one final good night. It began, as all great medieval scandals do, with a hole in a sock. Not just any hole, a hole so vast, so gaping, so existentially offensive that it threatened the very dignity of Sir Reginald's left foot. The sock, once a proud woolen warrior, now resembled a sad, fuzzy donut. Agnes, the scullery maid, discovered it while doing laundry, and gasped so loudly that 3 rats fainted. "This," she declared, holding the sock aloft like a sacred relic, "is a challenge." And thus, the sock-mending tournament of 1347 was born. Every servant in Grumblethorpe Castle was invited, nay, summoned, to compete in the noble art of needlework. The rules were simple. Mend the sock, make it wearable, and add flair if possible. Bonus points for embroidery. Fewer points for bloodshed. The contestants gathered in the grand hall, which was technically the broom closet, but they hung a tapestry of a goose wearing a crown, so it felt regal. Ned the stable boy arrived with a thimble on each finger and declared himself Sir Stitch-a-lot. Mabel, the cook's assistant, brought a basket of turnips for emotional support. The butler, Mr. Pimplenose, entered with a needle so long it could double as a fencing foil. The sock was placed on a velvet cushion, actually a folded towel that smelled faintly of stew, and the tournament began. Agnes stitched with the speed of a caffeinated squirrel. Her technique was flawless, her threadwork elegant. She added a tiny embroidered dragon that breathed fire, or at least looked like it sneezed. Ned, meanwhile, attempted experimental sock architecture. He added a drawbridge, a moat, and a tiny woolen knight. It was impressive, but the sock could no longer bend. Mabel's sock was less mended and more marinated. She had accidentally dipped it in gravy while multitasking. "It's warm," she offered, "and delicious." Mr. Pimplenose, ever the perfectionist, stitched in silence. His sock gleamed with golden thread and smelled faintly of lavender. It was beautiful. It was majestic. It was missing. "Sabotage," cried Agnes, pointing at Ned, who was suspiciously chewing something wool-like. "I was hungry," he protested, "and it looked like a meatball." The tournament descended into chaos. Needles flew. Turnips were hurled. Someone tried to duel with a spoon. The tapestry goose fell off the wall and was declared the winner by default. In the end, the sock was never truly mended, but the servants laughed until their sides ached, and the rats wrote a ballad about the event titled "Ode to the Sock That Couldn't." And as the sun began to rise, the servants returned to their duties, hiding their thimbles and wiping gravy from their cheeks. The nobles would never know of the tournament, nor the glory, nor the goose, but the servants would remember, and so would the sock. Lady Mildred's nightgown, a delicate, lavender-scented, lace-trimmed garment of questionable modesty and undeniable fluff, had vanished. Again, this was the 3rd time in a fortnight. The first time, it had turned up in the moat, draped over a duck. The second time, it was discovered flying from the flagpole like a very confused surrender. But this time, it was truly gone. The castle buzzed with whispers. The nobles blamed the laundry maid. The laundry maid blamed the wind. The wind, when questioned, declined to comment. But the servants knew better. This was no accident. This was a mystery. Agnes, ever the sleuth, gathered the night council in the broom closet. She wore her curtain cloak and carried a magnifying glass made from a cracked goblet. "We have a thief among us," she declared, dramatically pointing at everyone. Ned the stable boy gasped so hard he inhaled a moth. Do you think it's the ghost again? The one who smells like pickled onions? Unlikely, said Mabel, flipping through her notebook titled Suspicious Things and Slightly Cursed Recipes. Ghosts don't usually fold laundry. The investigation began. They searched the laundry room. Nothing but socks, secrets, and one very judgmental cat. They interrogated the butler, who claimed he hadn't seen a nightgown since 1329 and preferred to keep it that way. They even questioned the tapestry goose, just in case. Then, in the pantry, they found it. Not the nightgown. No, that would be too easy. They found a broom, wearing a bonnet, and a note. The note read, Dearest Mildred, your nightgown brings me joy. I twirl in it when no one's watching. I feel alive. Yours forever. B. B? Whispered Agnes. Who's B? Broom, said Ned, eyes wide. The broom is in love with Lady Mildred. There was a long silence. Then Mabel said, Well, that explains the footprints in the flour. They decided not to tell Lady Mildred. Some mysteries, they agreed, were better left unswept. Instead, they returned the nightgown to her chamber, folded neatly with a sprig of lavender and a note that simply read, Laundry delay. Apologies. Definitely not broom-related. Lady Mildred never asked questions. She simply nodded, sipped her tea, and muttered something about the romance of the unknown. And so, the servants of Grumblethorpe added another tale to their candlelit chronicles, a tale of longing, linen, and a broom with dreams. The royal fig and fennel pudding, baked once a year to celebrate Duke Grumblethorpe's birthday, was said to be so rich it could pay taxes, so dense it had its own gravitational pull, so fragrant that one whiff could make a monk break into interpretive dance. And this year, it was guarded like treasure. Cook Beatrix had locked it in the pantry behind 3 bolts, a mousetrap, and a very angry goose named Gerald. The pudding sat on a silver platter, glistening under candlelight, smug and figgy. But the servants had a plan. Agnes, Ned, Mabel, and the rest of the night council had been dreaming of that pudding for months. They'd written poems about it. They'd sketched it in charcoal. One footman had composed a lute ballad titled O Sweet Pudding, Thou Art My Destiny. The heist was on. At precisely midnight, Agnes led the team through the castle's secret passage, which was technically just a hole behind the mop rack. Ned wore his stealthiest hay cloak. Mabel carried a spoon she'd named Justice. They reached the pantry door. Gerald the goose hissed. Distraction protocol, whispered Agnes. Ned stepped forward and began honking in goose dialect. Gerald paused, confused. Mabel tossed him a turnip. Gerald blinked, then waddled off, muttering something about union rules. Inside, the pudding gleamed like a holy relic. The servants stared in awe. Is it glowing? Whispered Mabel. No, said Agnes. That's just the fennel. It's dramatic. They lifted the pudding carefully, reverently, like it was a newborn baby made of dessert. They tiptoed back through the passage, past the mop rack, through the laundry room, and into the broom closet, their sacred council chamber. And there, under flickering candlelight, they feasted. Spoons clinked, figs flew. Someone cried. Someone else proposed marriage to the pudding. It was glorious, until the butler walked in. Mr. Pimplenose stared at the scene. Servants covered in pudding, the silver platter empty, Gerald the goose holding a spoon. There was silence. Then Mr. Pimplenose said, I never liked fennel. and walked out. The servants cheered. The pudding was gone, but the legend remained. They would speak of this night for generations, or at least until someone stole the Duchess's invisible cat, and as dawn crept in, they wiped their mouths, hid the evidence, and returned to their posts. The nobles would wake to a mysteriously missing pudding and a goose with a smug expression. But the servants, they had tasted victory and figs. Sir Barnaby von Snorebottom III was a man of noble birth, questionable hygiene, and legendary nasal acoustics. Each night, as the castle settled into slumber, Sir Barnaby's snoring erupted like a bagpipe possessed by a dragon. It echoed through stone corridors, rattled chandeliers, and once caused a tapestry to unravel itself in protest. The servants called him Sir Snore-a-Lot, not to his face, of course. They valued their jobs and their eardrums. Agnes, the scullery maid, had tried stuffing goose feathers into the keyhole. Ned, the stable boy, once attempted to muffle the sound with hay. Mabel even baked a pie filled with lavender and hope, hoping the scent might lull him into silence. It did not. He ate the pie and snored louder. One night, after a particularly violent snore shook the pantry shelves and caused a jar of pickled turnips to explode, the servants had had enough. It was time for rebellion. They gathered in the broom closet, armed with pillows, earplugs made from stale bread, and a scroll titled Declaration of Pillow Pendants. Agnes read aloud, "We, the underslept and oversnored upon, do hereby declare our right to silence, sanity, and uninterrupted dreams. We demand muffling, muting, or magical intervention, or at least a nap." The plan was simple. Sneak into Sir Barnaby's chamber and replace every pillow with one enchanted for silence, or failing that, one filled with mashed peas. Ned led the infiltration team. He wore slippers for stealth and carried a pillow embroidered with the words, "Shh, happens." Mabel brought a backup pillow stuffed with pudding. Experimental, but promising. They crept into Sir Barnaby's room. He lay sprawled across the bed like a beached walrus, mouth agape, snoring in three-part harmony. Agnes whispered, "Deploy the pillows." They swapped each one carefully, replacing fluff with silence, feathers with mashed legumes. Mabel accidentally dropped hers, and it made a squelch. Sir Barnaby snorted, rolled over, and muttered, "More gravy." Then silence. The snoring stopped. The servants stared in awe. Had they succeeded? Had mashed peas saved the night? Sir Barnaby let out one final snore, soft, gentle, like a kitten sighing into a cloud, and then slept peacefully. The servants tiptoed out, victorious. The rebellion had worked. The castle was quiet. The tapestry re-raveled itself in celebration. From that night on, Sir Barnaby's snores were but a whisper, muffled by enchanted pillows and the occasional pudding. The servants slept soundly, dreaming of quieter days and mashed pea miracles. And in the broom closet, the declaration of pillow pendants was framed and hung beside the tapestry goose. Not all heroes wear capes. Some wear aprons and carry tiny cloths soaked in vinegar. Deep beneath the clatter of noble feasts and the clinking of goblets, a clandestine group met in silence. Their mission? To polish every spoon in Grumblethorpe Castle until it gleamed like the Duke's bald spot at sunrise. They called themselves the Order of the Gleam. Agnes had stumbled upon them by accident. One night, while searching for her missing sock, which had eloped with a ladle, she opened the cellar door and found a circle of servants hunched over a table, each gently caressing a spoon with reverent precision. "Is this a cult?" she asked. "No," whispered a footman named Cyril, eyes wide and spoon shinier than the moon. "It's a lifestyle." The order had rules. Rule 1, no spoon shall be dull. Rule 2, forks are forbidden. They are the enemy. Rule 3, if you drop a spoon, you must apologize to it. Meetings were held every Tuesday at midnight, unless it was raining, in which case they met under the laundry line and wore soup bowls as helmets. Their leader, Mistress Glimmer, was a former ladle polisher turned spoon prophet. She claimed to have once seen her future in the reflection of a dessert spoon. It involved turnips and mild disappointment. Agnes was intrigued. She joined the order, bringing with her a rogue teaspoon she'd rescued from the compost bin. It was dented, slightly haunted, and named Gerald. The polishing rituals were intense. Vinegar, lemon rinds, and elbow grease were applied with sacred chants like, "Shine, O mighty scoop, reflect our dreams and soup." One night, disaster struck. A noble banquet was announced. 300 guests, 600 spoons, and only 3 days to prepare. The order panicked. Mistress Glimmer fainted into a pile of butter knives, which were tolerated but never loved. Agnes rallied the troops. "We polish not for glory," she cried, "but for the gleam." The servants worked tirelessly. Spoons were buffed, blessed, and occasionally serenaded. Ned the stable boy composed a spoon-themed jig. Mabel invented a pudding that doubled as polish. Gerald, the haunted teaspoon, whispered encouragement. On the night of the banquet, the nobles gasped. The spoon sparkled so brightly that one baron mistook his reflection for a ghost and apologized profusely. The duke declared it the shiniest feast in all the realm and accidentally complimented a ladle. The Order of the Gleam celebrated with a silent toast, using spoons naturally. Agnes was promoted to Spoon Sentinel. Gerald was retired with honors and placed in a velvet pouch, and so the secret society continued, polishing in the shadows, gleaming in the night, and reminding the world that even the humblest utensil could shine like a star. The pantry had always been a place of mystery. It smelled of time, secrets, and occasionally regret. The shelves groaned under the weight of pickled turnips, suspicious jams, and one jar labeled "definitely not cursed." But what truly made the pantry legendary was its ghost, or so the servants claimed. It began one foggy Tuesday, when Mabel the cook's assistant opened the pantry door and found the cheese wheel floating, not dramatically, just hovering slightly, like it was unsure whether to commit to haunting or just fermenting. She screamed. The cheese dropped. A rat applauded. Rumors spread like butter on hot bread. The pantry was haunted. The ghost was angry and possibly lactose intolerant. Agnes, ever the investigator, assembled the night council. "We must uncover the truth," she declared, holding a candle and a spoon for dramatic effect. "Is it a ghost, a prank, or just very ambitious dairy?" Ned the stable boy suggested a seance. He'd recently read half a book titled How to Summon Spirits and Avoid Mild Possession. The other half had been eaten by Gerald the goose. They gathered in the pantry at midnight. The candle flickered. The cheese trembled. Mabel wore garlic around her neck, just in case the ghost was Italian. "Spirit of the pantry," Agnes intoned, "reveal thyself." There was silence, then a squeak, then a dramatic gust of wind that smelled like cinnamon and fear. Suddenly, from behind a sack of flour, emerged a rat. But not just any rat. This one wore a tiny cape and a monocle and carried a scroll. "I am Remy," he squeaked, bowing low. "Thespian, ghost impersonator, cheese enthusiast." The servants stared. "You're not a ghost?" asked Mabel. "No," said Remy. "But I do perform ghost-themed monologues every Tuesday. Tonight's piece was The Wailing of the Way." Agnes clapped. Ned cried. Mabel offered him a turnip. Remy explained that he and his troupe, the rodents of the round cheese, had been rehearsing in the pantry for months. Their performances included Hamlet, but everyone's a cracker, and Macbeth, the cheddar cut. The servants were delighted. They declared the pantry officially haunted by drama, not death, and began attending weekly performances. Gerald the goose became a critic. The butler brought snacks. Even Lady Mildred once peeked in and whispered, "Brava!" And so, the legend of the ghost of Pantry Past lived on, not as a tale of terror, but of theatrical rodents, floating cheese, and the power of performance. By day, Elsbeth the chambermaid was quiet, efficient, and slightly allergic to dust. She fluffed pillows with precision, folded sheets like origami swans, and once removed a spider from Lady Mildred's bonnet without screaming, though the spider did. But by night, Elsbeth sang, not just humming while sweeping. No, she performed full operas, dramatic, sweeping, emotionally charged arias about laundry, longing, and the tragic fate of mismatched socks. Her stage, the East Wing hallway, known for its excellent acoustics and mild draft. Her audience, a mop named Luciano, 3 rats in velvet capes, and occasionally Gerald the goose, who preferred baritone. It began one moonlit evening when Elspeth, overwhelmed by the injustice of wrinkled pillowcases, burst into song, "O linen, thou cruel mistress of creases, why dost thou fold against me so?" The mop wept. A rat fainted. A tapestry fluttered in applause. Word spread through the servant quarters. "Elsbeth's singing again," whispered Agnes. "She hit a high note so pure, it cleaned a window." The Night Council decided to support her artistic endeavors. Mabel baked opera-themed biscuits. Ned built a stage from overturned buckets and one suspiciously wobbly stool. Agnes stitched a curtain from old tablecloths and embroidered it with dramatic eyebrows. Elsbeth's next performance was La Traviata de Laundry, a tragic tale of a chambermaid who falls in love with a noble's bathrobe. The climax involved a duet with a broom and a dramatic collapse into a pile of towels. It was magnificent, but trouble loomed. One night, as Elspeth reached the crescendo of Ode to the Forgotten Sock, a noble wandered into the hallway. Lord Percival, half asleep and wearing a nightcap shaped like a duck, blinked at the scene. "Is this a dream?" he mumbled. Elsbeth froze. The mop dropped its monocle. Gerald honked. Agnes stepped forward. "Yes, my lord. A dream. A musical one. You must return to bed before the chorus begins." Lord Percival nodded solemnly. "Tell the soprano she has the voice of a slightly enchanted turnip." Then he shuffled away. Elspeth resumed her aria. The hallway echoed with emotion. The mop twirled. The rats threw confetti made from cheese wrappers. And so, the chambermaid's midnight opera became a tradition. A secret show for the servants, a celebration of dreams, and a reminder that even in the quiet corners of a castle, art could bloom, preferably in C minor. In the dusty depths of Grumblethorpe Castle S library, Wedged between ye old tax codes and how to marry your cousin respectfully, there lay a book so powerful, so dangerous, it had been sealed with wax rope and one very judgmental bookmark. It was the Jester's Forbidden Joke Book. Legend said it was penned by Jingles the Unhinged, a court jester who once made a baron laugh so hard he fell into a moat and declared war on a duck. The book contained jokes so potent, so absurdly witty, they could cause hiccups, fainting, and in one case, spontaneous, interpretive dance. Naturally, the servants wanted it. Agnes led the expedition. "We must retrieve the book," she whispered, "for the good of comedy, and possibly revenge." Ned the stable boy brought a ladder made of hay. Mabel carried a pie, not for distraction, just because she was hungry. Gerald the goose came along for moral support and honking. They reached the library at midnight. The book sat on a pedestal, glowing faintly and humming the tune of "Pop Goes the Weasel." Agnes approached cautiously. "Remember," she said, "no giggling. It feeds on laughter." She cracked it open. The first joke read, "Why did the knight bring string to the joust?" "Because he wanted to tie the score." Ned snorted. Mabel giggled. Gerald honked so hard he fell over. The book shimmered. A gust of wind blew through the room. A nearby scroll burst into flames. The servants stared. "This is powerful," whispered Agnes. They took the book to the broom closet and began reading aloud. Each joke caused chaos. One footman laughed so hard he hiccuped for 3 days. A chambermaid giggled herself into a nap. The butler chuckled once, then claimed he'd been possessed. But the real danger came when Lady Mildred wandered in. She'd heard rumors of unauthorized mirth and came to investigate. Agnes panicked. Ned tried to hide the book under Gerald. Mabel offered her pie. Lady Mildred narrowed her eyes. "What is that?" Agnes held up the book. "It's a manual for spoon polishing, with jokes." Lady Mildred opened it, read a line, paused. Then she laughed. Not a polite chuckle, not a noble titter, a full-bodied, snorting, knee-slapping laugh that echoed through the castle and caused a tapestry to unravel in joy. "I haven't laughed like that since the Duke fell into the pudding," she said, wiping tears. "Carry on." And so, the servants were granted official permission to read the Jester's Forbidden Joke Book. In moderation, they held nightly readings, shared punchlines, and even hosted a comedy night where Gerald performed stand-up, mostly honking. But it killed. The castle was never the same. Nobles smiled more, rats giggled. Even the haunted teaspoon cracked a grin. And in the broom closet, the book sat proudly, a reminder that laughter, like pudding, was best shared in secret. It began with a crunch, not the satisfying kind, like biting into a fresh apple or stepping on a particularly arrogant crouton. No, this was a sinister crunch, a rebellious crunch, a cabbage crunch. Mabel, the cook's assistant, was the first to notice. She entered the pantry to retrieve a turnip and found the cabbages organized. They weren't just sitting in a pile. They were stacked in formation, rows, columns. One cabbage wore a tiny crown made of parsley. She screamed. The cabbages did not flinch. Word spread quickly through the servant quarters. "The cabbages are planning something," whispered Agnes. "I saw one wink at me." Ned, the stable boy, claimed he overheard them chanting. It was faint, he said, but rhythmic, like, "Leave us alone. Leave us alone." The night council convened immediately. Gerald the goose was appointed vegetable security advisor. He took the role seriously and pecked a suspicious carrot for good measure. Agnes led the investigation. She interviewed the onions, tight-lipped, interrogated the potatoes, too starchy, and bribed the radishes with compliments. Nothing. Then, at midnight, the cabbages moved. They rolled silently through the pantry, down the corridor, and into the grand hall. One cabbage carried a scroll. Another wore a monocle. A third had a tiny sword made from a celery stalk. Agnes gasped. They're staging a coup. The scroll was unfurled. It read, "We, the cabbages of Grumblethorpe, demand respect, refrigeration, and fewer stew appearances. We are not garnish. We are destiny." The servants were torn. On one hand, they admired the cabbages' organization. On the other, they feared being overthrown by salad. Mabel stepped forward. "Let's negotiate." She offered the cabbages a peace treaty. Fewer stews, more spotlight in side dishes, and a commemorative mural in the pantry. The cabbages considered. One rolled forward and nodded solemnly. The rebellion ended peacefully. The next day, the nobles dined on turnip soup. The cabbages were given a shelf of honor, complete with velvet lining and a tiny chandelier. Gerald the goose received a medal for bravery and a stern warning for pecking the mural. And Mabel? She became a legend, the diplomat who brokered peace with produce. From that night on, the servants remembered the crunch, the courage, the cabbage uprising, and they never underestimated a vegetable again. Mr. Pimplenose, the castle's butler, was a man of mystery. He spoke in syllables, walked like he was perpetually judging your posture, and polished goblets with the intensity of a man who had once lost a duel to a smudge. No one knew his first name. Some said it was Reginald. Others claimed it was Butler. Gerald the goose insisted it was Steve. But one thing was certain. Mr. Pimplenose had a past. It came to light one foggy evening when a letter arrived, sealed with wax, scented with vengeance, and addressed to the Goblet Whisperer. Inside was a challenge. "You stole my honor. You chipped my chalice. Meet me at midnight in the courtyard. Bring your best blade, or your worst excuses." Sir Crispin of the Cracked Cup. The servants gasped. A duel, in the moonlight, with actual swords and possibly dramatic music. Agnes rallied the Night Council. "We must support Mr. Pimplenose," she declared. "He's one of us. And also, I want to see if he can fence in those shoes." Ned the stable boy offered his hay sword. Mabel brought pudding for morale. Gerald insisted on being Mr. Pimplenose's second. Despite being a goose and having no concept of dueling etiquette, at midnight the courtyard was misty and dramatic. Sir Crispin stood tall, wearing armor that squeaked and a helmet shaped like a teapot. Mr. Pimplenose arrived in his butler uniform, carrying a fencing foil and a napkin embroidered with dignity. The duel began. Clang, swish, parry, honk. Gerald, confused by the rules, charged Sir Crispin and pecked his shin. Sir Crispin yelped, tripped over a decorative shrub, and landed in a puddle shaped like disappointment. Mr. Pimplenose lowered his foil. "I accept your surrender," he said, dabbing his brow with the dignity napkin. Sir Crispin groaned. "You win. Again. Curse your impeccable table settings." The servants cheered. Gerald honked triumphantly. Mabel handed out pudding. Agnes declared it the most elegant duel in castle history. From that night on, Mr. Pimplenose was known not just as the butler, but as the duelist of the dining room. Sir Crispin retired to a monastery where he taught etiquette to squirrels. Gerald received a tiny medal and immediately tried to eat it. And the servants, they added another tale to their candlelit chronicles, a tale of honor, goblets, and one goose who believed in justice. It started with a sneeze, not from a servant nor a noble, but from a rat named Bartholomew, who had recently developed hay fever after nesting in the stable boy S. sock drawer. His sneeze startled a goose, which startled a maid, which startled a broom, which knocked over a jar of pickled onions. And in the chaos, someone asked, "How many rats are actually in this castle?" Silence. No one knew. Agnes, ever the organizer, declared, "We need a census, a proper count, for science, and possibly cheese distribution." The night council agreed. Mabel baked tiny pies to lure participants. Ned created a registration booth out of buckets and optimism. Gerald the goose was appointed head of rodent relations, despite his tendency to chase anything with a tail. The census began. Day 1, 47 rats registered. Names included Whiskerella, Sir Nibbles, and one simply called Dave. Day 2, 112 rats, including a jazz trio and a rat who claimed to be the reincarnation of a disgraced baron. Day 3, chaos. The rats began forming factions. The pantry rats demanded recognition as culinary consultants. The cellar rats insisted on being called moisture management specialists. One rat unionized and demanded dental coverage. Agnes tried to keep order. "We're just counting tails," she pleaded. But the rats had dreams. They wanted representation. They wanted voting rights. They wanted a mural. Mabel painted one, a heroic scene of rats holding spoons and wearing tiny capes. It was immediately nibbled into abstract art. Meanwhile, Ned discovered a rat living in the chandelier who spoke only in riddles. Gerald chased him. The chandelier fell. The census booth collapsed. A pie was flung. A noble sneezed. The census was officially declared statistically inconclusive. Final count. Somewhere between 200 and a lot. But the servants didn't mind. They'd learned much. Rats were clever, organized, and surprisingly fond of interpretive dance. The pantry was renamed Rodent Commons. Gerald was demoted to Goose at Large. Agnes received a medal made of cheese. And the rats, they held a celebration, the Festival of the Counted, featuring tiny lanterns, squeaky speeches, and a performance of Ratlet, a tragic tale of love, betrayal, and cheddar. From that night on, the servants respected their whiskered neighbors. They shared crumbs, stories, and occasionally laundry space. And though the census was a mess, it was a beautiful one, full of tales, teamwork, and the joy of counting what truly matters. It was a truth universally acknowledged that the laundry room of Grumblethorpe Castle was cursed. Not dramatically cursed, no lightning bolts or demonic towels, just damp, perpetually, inexplicably damp. No matter how sunny the day, how roaring the fire, or how aggressively the servants waved their drying paddles, the laundry remained moist. Socks clung to each other like desperate lovers. Tunics dripped with melancholy. One pair of bloomers developed moss. Agnes had had enough. "I've wrung this towel 17 times, she declared, holding up a cloth that squelched audibly. "It's wetter than when I started." Mabel nodded solemnly. "I baked a pie in here once. It came out as soup." The night council convened in the broom closet. Gerald the goose arrived wearing a damp bonnet and a look of betrayal. Ned brought a scroll he'd found behind the laundry chute, ancient, moldy, and written in dramatic calligraphy. It read, "Beware the curse of the eternal damp, for when the socks weep, the prophecy shall awaken. Only the chosen dryer may restore balance." Agnes blinked. Chosen dryer? Ned shrugged. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's a particularly aggressive breeze. They began their quest. First, they tried fire. Mabel lit 17 candles and one experimental pudding. The laundry steamed, then remoistened itself out of spite. Next, they tried wind. Ned built a fan from goose feathers and desperation. It blew one sock into the moat and then collapsed. Then, Agnes had an idea. What if the laundry isn't cursed, but sad? They held a concert. Elspeth, the chambermaid, performed her opera, Ode to the Damp Undergarments. Gerald honked in harmony. The laundry swayed gently, emotionally, but remained wet. Finally, Mabel brewed a potion, a mix of vinegar, thyme, and motivational quotes. She sprinkled it over the laundry while chanting, "Dry, ye soggy garments. Rise from the mildew. Be bold. Be crisp. Be wearable." There was a flash, a gust, a dramatic squelch, and then silence. The laundry was dry. The socks stood upright. The tunics fluffed with pride. The bloomers shed their moss and whispered, "Thank you." The curse was lifted. The servants rejoiced. They danced in crisp linens. Gerald wore a freshly dried cape and declared himself Lord of the Laundry. The prophecy scroll was framed and hung beside the tapestry goose, and from that night on, the laundry room was a place of miracles, where dampness dared not linger, and socks found their courage. Cook Beatrix was a legend. She could roast a pheasant blindfolded, bake a pie that made nobles weep, and once created a pudding so emotionally complex it required therapy. Her stews were famous, hearty, fragrant, and occasionally sentient. But one night, she created something different. It began with a whisper. "I've invented a new stew," she told Mabel, eyes gleaming. "It's bold. It's daring. It contains 17 herbs, 3 questionable mushrooms, and 1 ingredient I refuse to name." Mabel blinked. "Is it legal?" Beatrix smiled. "Only in 3 kingdoms, and one of them is imaginary." The stew simmered in the cauldron, bubbling with mystery. It glowed faintly. It hummed. Gerald the goose refused to go near it, which was saying something. He once ate a candle. Agnes was summoned. "Taste it," said Beatrix, handing her a spoon carved from a turnip. Agnes took a bite. Her eyebrows did a cartwheel. She saw colors that didn't exist. She briefly forgot how socks worked. "It's powerful," she whispered. Word spread. The servants gathered in the broom closet, each eager to try the stew. Reactions varied. Ned danced uncontrollably for 7 minutes. Mabel recited poetry in Latin. Despite never learning Latin, the butler declared his love for a mop. The stew was dubbed Chaos a la Beatrix. But then, disaster struck. Lady Mildred tasted it. She blinked. She gasped. She declared, "This stew has awakened my third eye." Then she ordered all other recipes in the castle to be burned and replaced with chaos. The nobles panicked. The Duke demanded a stew duel. The Duchess tried to outlaw flavor. One baron attempted to marry the cauldron. The servants convened. "We must contain the chaos," said Agnes, "before someone tries to knight a carrot." Beatrix agreed. She modified the recipe, toned down the mushrooms, replaced the mystery ingredient with turnip essence, and added a dash of humility. The new stew was still delicious, but less reality-bending. Lady Mildred accepted the compromise. The nobles returned to their bland broths. The mop was gently let down. Gerald resumed eating candles, and Beatrix, she kept the original recipe hidden, locked in a box, buried beneath the pantry, guarded by a rat named Kevin. From that night on, the servants remembered the stew, the flavor, the chaos, the brief moment when a spoon became a portal, and they knew, in the right hands, a recipe could change the world, or at least make it dance. Ned the stable boy was not what one might call academically gifted. He once tried to alphabetize horses. He believed thunder was sky hiccups, and he thought quantum physics was a type of soup. But Ned had dreams, big ones, time-traveling ones. It all began when he found a scroll in the hayloft titled Ye Mystical Theories of Time and Other Confusing Things. It was mostly doodles and one recipe for turnip stew. But Ned was inspired. I shall build a time machine, he declared, and I shall use buckets. Agnes blinked. Buckets? Yes, said Ned, eyes gleaming. They're sturdy, stackable, and they smell like destiny. The Night Council was skeptical. Mabel offered to bake a pie for the journey, in case you land in a century without snacks. Gerald the goose honked in support and brought a feather for luck. Construction began. Ned stacked 12 buckets in a spiral, added a saddle, and glued a spoon to the front for navigation. He called it the chrono bucket. It wobbled. It squeaked. It smelled faintly of regret. Agnes added a candle for ambiance. Mabel painted racing stripes. Gerald pecked the spoon and declared it a noble vessel. At midnight, Ned climbed aboard. Set the dial for last Tuesday, he shouted, despite there being no dial. He kicked off. The buckets rolled. The candle flickered. The spoon fell off. Ned disappeared into the broom closet. There was silence. Then, a crash. A squawk. A dramatic sneeze. Ned emerged, covered in flour, holding a turnip, and wearing Lady Mildred's bonnet. I think I went back to baking day, he said. Also, I may have invented powdered time. The servants applauded. The chrono bucket was declared a partial success. Gerald tried to eat it. Agnes suggested a steering wheel. Mabel baked a commemorative pie, shaped like a clock. From that night on, the stable boy was known as Ned, the time wrangler. The chrono bucket was placed in the pantry as a monument to ambition. And every Tuesday, the servants checked for temporal anomalies, mostly misplaced socks and déjà vu. And though history remained mostly intact, the legend of Ned's time machine lived on, a tale of hay, hope, and the belief that with enough buckets, anything was possible. Benedict the scribe was a quiet man. He spent his days transcribing noble proclamations, rewriting shopping lists in calligraphy, and correcting the Duke's spelling of turnip. He wore ink-stained robes, smelled faintly of parchment, and once cried during a particularly moving comma. But Benedict had a secret. He was in love, not with a noble lady, nor a mysterious traveler, nor even the Duchess's invisible cat. No, Benedict was hopelessly, passionately, undeniably in love with a broom. Her name was Bristolia. She stood in the corner of the library, proud and bristled, her handle polished to a gentle sheen. Benedict claimed she had the posture of a queen and the sweep of destiny. It began with glances, then poems, then, inevitably, letters. Each night, Benedict snuck into the broom closet, which doubled as the Night Council's headquarters and tripled as Gerald the Goose's nap zone, and slipped a scroll into Bristolia's bristles. Dearest Bristolia, your silence speaks volumes. Your sweep cleanses my soul. I long to be the dust beneath your grace. Forever swept, B. Agnes discovered the letters while reorganizing the mop rack. She read one, blinked twice, and declared, "We need to stage an intervention, or a wedding." Ned was thrilled. "I'll be the flower boy," he shouted, tossing hay. Mabel baked a cake shaped like a dustpan. Gerald honked the wedding march, but Benedict was shy. "She hasn't responded," he whispered. "Perhaps she's not ready, or perhaps she's emotionally reserved." Agnes suggested a grand gesture. That night, under candlelight and surrounded by servants, wearing curtain capes and mop tiaras, Benedict read his final letter aloud. "Oh, Bristolia, my bristled muse, I've swept through emotions, dusted off doubt, and now I stand, heart in hand, handle in hope. If you'll have me, I vow to never let you stand alone in the corner again." There was silence. Then, a creak, a gust, a broom fell gently forward. The servants gasped. Gerald fainted. Mabel cried into the cake. Benedict took it as a sign. "She accepts," he whispered. From that night on, Bristolia was moved to Benedict's writing desk. He polished her daily, read her poetry, and occasionally asked her opinion on semicolons. She never responded, but her bristles always seemed content. And though the nobles never knew, the servants celebrated the union. A love story for the ages, written in ink, swept in silence, and sealed with a goose's approval. It began with a flicker, not the romantic kind, no gentle glow or cozy ambiance, but a flicker of defiance that said, "We've had enough." The candles of Grumblethorpe Castle were tired of being lit, snuffed, relit, forgotten, dripped on, and occasionally used to toast suspicious marshmallows, poked, prodded, and placed in drafty hallways with no regard for their waxy feelings. And so, one night, they rebelled. Agnes noticed first. She lit a candle in the broom closet, and it immediately extinguished itself with a dramatic buffed. "Rude," she muttered, relighting it, and it went out again, then hissed. Ned tried lighting one in the pantry. It flared up, spelled no in smoke, and melted into a puddle shaped like a frown. Mabel attempted diplomacy, offering the candles scented wax, wick massages, and a tiny hat. But they formed a circle and refused to burn. Gerald the goose honked at them. One candle flared in warning, and Gerald backed off, muttering about fiery attitudes. The Night Council convened. "We're dealing with a full-blown wax rebellion," said Agnes, holding a torch that flickered nervously. "If we don't resolve this, bedtime will be dark." Ned suggested lanterns. Mabel proposed glow-in-the-dark pudding. Elsbeth offered soothing lullabies. The candles remained unmoved. Then, from the shadows, came Benedict the scribe. "I've been studying candle psychology," he said, holding a scroll titled "Wicked Minds." "They feel underappreciated, overused. They want poetry." "Poetry?" Agnes blinked. "Yes," said Benedict. "They want to be seen as more than light sources. They want to be art." So, the servants wrote poems. "O Candle, Thou Flame of Mood," by Agnes. "Wax and Wane, My Flickering Friend," by Ned. "Burn, Baby, Burn, Respectfully," by Mabel, and read them aloud in the grand hall, surrounded by sulking candles. Slowly, one candle lit itself, then another, then all of them, glowing with pride, warmth, and a hint of smugness. The rebellion ended. The candles agreed to burn again, under new conditions. Weekly poetry readings, wax breaks, and no more marshmallow experiments. Gerald signed the treaty with a honk and a feather. From that night on, the castle glowed not just with light, but with respect. The candles burned brighter, the servants slept sounder, and bedtime became a celebration of flame and verse. And in the broom closet, a single candle flickered gently, not in protest, but in peace. The Duchess of Grumblethorpe was a woman of peculiar tastes. She wore hats made of lace and mild confusion. She spoke only in rhymes on Wednesdays, and most notably, she owned a cat no one had ever seen. Its name? Whimsy. According to the Duchess, Whimsy was a creature of elegance, mystery, and occasional teleportation. She claimed it was invisible, not metaphorically, but literally. She's shy, the Duchess would say, sipping tea from a cup that meowed. The servants were skeptical. Agnes once tried to find Whimsy using a trail of sardines. The sardines vanished. Gerald the goose honked at thin air and was slapped by something unseen. Mabel discovered paw prints in her pudding. Delicate, feline, and slightly judgmental. The Night Council launched an investigation. Ned built a cat detector from spoons, string, and one very confused potato. It beeped whenever someone said, meow. Elsbeth composed a lullaby titled, Come Out, Whimsy, We Have Snacks. Gerald wore a bell and wandered the halls, hoping to befriend the unseen. Then, one night, Agnes found a scroll in the library. It read, To Whimsy, Duchess's delight, you vanish by day, you pounce by night, your whiskers unseen, your mischief profound, you knock over goblets without making a sound. It was signed, Fellow Ghost of the Pantry. The servants gasped. Was Whimsy a ghost? A magical being? A very sneaky regular cat? They set a trap, not to catch her, but to observe. A velvet cushion, a bowl of cream, and a copy of The Art of Being Aloof. They waited. At midnight, the cream vanished. The cushion was warm. The book had been clawed into a haiku. I am not yours, no. I nap where moonlight whispers. Feed me, then be gone. The servants were awestruck. Whimsy was real and poetic. From that night on, they left offerings, cream, poems, and occasionally a small fish named Reginald. Whimsy never appeared, but her presence was felt in the rustle of curtains, the vanishing of snacks, and the occasional meow echoing through the halls. The Duchess smiled knowingly. She likes you, she said, especially the pudding. And so, Whimsy became part of castle lore. The invisible cat who ruled with silent paws and mysterious charm. The servants respected her, feared her, and occasionally blamed her for missing socks. Because in Grumblethorpe, even the unseen had a place, especially if they were fluffy. Lady Mildred sneezed so violently during her bedtime tea that she knocked over a candlestick, startled a footman, and caused Gerald the goose to honk in alarm. The resulting chaos led to a spilled scroll, a misread memo, and one very unfortunate scheduling error. The memo was meant to say, rotate the mattresses in the guest wing, but what it actually said, thanks to ink smudges and Gerald stepping on the parchment, was relocate all mattresses, swap beds, confuse everyone. And so, the servants obeyed. At midnight, Agnes led the charge. We're swapping every bed, she declared. No questions, no logic, just linen warfare. Ned, the stable boy, dragged mattresses through hallways like hay bales. Mabel coordinated pillow placement with military precision. Elsbeth sang lullabies to confused bedposts. Gerald supervised, occasionally honking at furniture. By dawn, the castle was transformed. Lady Mildred awoke in the stable, nestled between two pleasantly surprised ponies. The Duke found himself in the pantry, curled up beside a barrel of pickled optimism. The Duchess opened her eyes to discover she was in the broom closet, spooning a mop named Bristolia. Servants, too, were affected. Agnes woke in the tapestry room, wrapped in historical threads. Ned found himself in the bell tower, dangling from a rope and dreaming of turnips. Mabel slept soundly in the laundry basket, surrounded by freshly dried rebellion. Confusion reigned. Breakfast was delayed. Nobles wandered the halls in nightcaps and indignation. One baron demanded a refund. Another tried to duel a mattress. The butler refused to comment, citing bed-related trauma. But amidst the chaos, something magical happened. People talked. Nobles met servants. Servants met ponies. The Duchess complimented the broom. The Duke discovered he liked pickles. Lady Mildred declared, "This hay is surprisingly therapeutic." By evening, the castle was buzzing with stories, laughter, and one impromptu mattress joust. Agnes called it a logistical masterpiece. Mabel baked a commemorative pie, shaped like a bed. Gerald received a tiny crown and declared himself Lord of Linen. And though the beds were eventually returned to their rightful places, mostly, the memory of that night lingered. A night of swapped dreams, unexpected friendships, and the realization that sometimes the best way to shake up a castle is to shuffle the sheets. Grumblethorpe Castle never truly slept. By day, nobles paraded through parlors, debated the merits of goose-shaped goblets, and held meetings about meetings. But by night, oh, by night, the servants lived. They danced in the laundry room. They held secret operas in the hallway. They polished spoons until they could see their dreams in the reflection. They wrote love letters to brooms, counted rebellious rats, and once built a time machine out of buckets and hope. And on this particular night, everything happened at once. Agnes hosted a midnight poetry slam in the pantry. Mabel baked a pie that sang when sliced. Gerald the goose led a parade of embroidered tapestry characters through the courtyard. Ned accidentally summoned a ghost who only spoke in riddles about socks. The candles burned proudly. The invisible cat meowed in approval, and the moon watched it all with quiet amusement. But as the first rays of dawn crept over the castle walls, something changed. The laughter faded. The goose yawned. The mop leaned gently against the wall. One by one, the servants retreated to broom closets, haylofts, laundry baskets, and occasionally the pantry, which had excellent pillow storage. Agnes curled up beside a stack of scrolls. Mabel slept with a spoon in each hand. Ned snored into a bucket labeled Time Travel, Do Not Disturb. Gerald tucked his head under his wing and dreamed of pudding. And as the sun rose, casting golden light on the castle's towers and turrets, the servants slept. They slept deeply. They slept joyfully. They slept with the satisfaction of a night well lived, of stories told, secrets shared, and chaos embraced. Because in Grumblethorpe, the night belonged to the servants, and the day, that was for dreams. The castle is quiet now. The pantry hums softly. The broom closet sighs. And somewhere, a goose snores like a distant trumpet. Sleep well, dear reader. The servants will wake again when the moon calls. Good night.